Memory is the title of Season 3, Episode 5 of Silo, and with this installment quite literally opening up with one of the most beautiful shots of the season, with Shirley running in slow motion towards the door in black and white, where Juliet and Bernard were trapped, and the flames reflected in her eyes. I knew from that moment we'd be in for an emotional whirlwind of a ride. This episode was all about what the title of the episode promised: memories. We heard Bernard sharing what he was told happened when they returned, with the focus being put on Jules remembering what the safeguard protocol was, and how it could be stopped. With Jules finally regaining her memories of her time in Silo 17, there being clues about how to communicate to the 49 other silos that were built, and Daniel and Helen being driven to a specific destination because they were being listened to. What this episode was all about can quite literally be summed up by the final shot of the episode, inside of the silo. And that was the division that Sims was feeling between himself and his wife, Camille, after she became the head of it. The fact that she had the high ground, was looking down upon him, and there were levels of separation between them, showed just how strong that divide now is, and that he's no longer, nor was he ever, on the side of his wife while she's been in that position of power. They were against each other. And while in that position of power, she'd chosen to put the silo first over her own family, something that he just couldn't agree with. I wholeheartedly knew that in the Season 2 finale, when the algorithm told Sims to leave the vault because it wanted to speak with Camille and her alone, that it would be a breaking point for him. He'd spent his entire life devoting it to the silo, and also to Bernard. And he never felt like he was given the recognition or praise that he deserved. So, when Bernard quite literally betrayed the silo then overlooked Robert. Pair that with Camille not being willing to tell him anything that the algorithm told her. He then knew that he couldn't stand by and fight for it anymore, because it constantly overlooked him. He was going to put himself, and his son, first now. Camille wanted him to get rid of Lucas, Carl, Bernard, and Jules, because the algorithm didn't want them speaking of the safeguard protocol to anybody. But Sims simply didn't want to be viewed as the muscle like he always had been. He used his brain to realize that if they wanted the three of them out of the picture, then they must genuinely know some important information. Hence why he went against his wife and made out like Bernard was dead, but actually got Martha and McLean to help him go down to the Digger Void, and was keeping him hidden down there. I really loved the moment where Jules asked Bernard how he got down there, and then Sims appeared out of the blue and said, "How the F do you think?" That moment really did get me. And I feel like it was the first time where we saw what side Sims was truly on. We actually saw that Sims had a larger involvement in making sure that Jules was kept alive. He ensured that she was put in a position where she was unkillable and untouchable by the algorithm and the orders that it was putting out. He asked a favor for somebody to go to where Jules was being kept, where people were gathering, and to start the idea that with Bernard dead, they needed a new mayor. And that Jules would be the perfect person for it, as she was somebody that had been on the outside and had returned. With her being mayor, and most importantly, with the people wanting her to be mayor, it would mean that Camille wouldn't just simply be able to get her killed, as it would disrupt the silo and could cause mass chaos to erupt. Just like what we saw the algorithm predict earlier on in the season with the charts. As well as that, he was the person that told Regina to find a way of getting the sugar pills to Jules, to ensure that her memory wasn't being any more suppressed than what it was. Plus, he also wanted her to find any relics of Jules that could be used in order to draw her memory back, as through him and Bernard, like what we heard from Dr. Sankovic when he spoke with Daniel. Artifacts from somebody's past is what allows the memory suppression medication to become obsolete, to stop working, and for the memories to come flooding back. Sims showed that he's not necessarily a man of the people, but he's a man of standing by what's right, and fighting against what's wrong. There are truths about the silo, though, that he hadn't known about the entire time he'd been enforcing the rules and working alongside Bernard, all for no progression or recognition. And I believe that if he'd known that the higher-ups in the silo had the ability to wipe out a population at the click of a button, he wouldn't have been doing what he was originally doing. He's one of the most developed characters in the show when you look at the sheer journey that he's been on since Season 1, and that isn't showing any signs of stopping. Something that's also quite poignant is that I feel like he's realized that without his wife, and with her siding with the algorithm, he doesn't actually have anybody other than his son. This is why he's putting so much effort into making sure that he's got a good relationship with him, because that's all he's got. The silo essentially broke Sims. He was left in the shadows and kept out of the know for too long, and that's now come at a detriment to the silo and the algorithm, as he's now working against it. He'd been enforcing rules blindly, and I believe he's now realized that it wasn't necessarily the right thing to do. The sheriff is struggling. There's no denying that. And he's struggling for many different reasons. It's actually becoming clear to see that the weight of the secrets that are in the silo are now weighing heavy on his shoulders. He caught a glimpse of the outside world in the before time. His wife is an outsider. There's the death of Olla Kent. And now, there's the revelation that he got from McLean in this episode. It's a secret that's now going to add to that pile, too. With Paul wanting to dig deeper into the murder investigation of Olla Kent, he went to McLean, and that was where she led him to Critical Supply. Which is where he found out that in Critical Supply, the supply level wasn't at the level that it should have been at, and that Critical Supply was quite literally in a critical state. All of the items in that department were items that couldn't be built or replicated inside of the silo, and were placed there when the silos were first built. Things such as light bulbs. Light bulbs were actually the things that had been getting stolen from Critical Supply, to the point where 20 years ago, there were 70 years worth of light bulbs left, which sounds like an ideal situation. You're never going to end up in the dark, at least in the not-so-distant future. However, with the recent thefts that have been taking place, there were only 2 years' worth of bulbs left. So, if the bulbs couldn't be found, then the light bulbs in the farms wouldn't be able to be replaced, which would then mean that there'd be no food. And then eventually, the lights inside of the silo would go out. This would mean that the people of Silo 18 would essentially die of starvation in the pitch black. There was something about when McLean said that, where I really felt the haunting nature of it. The idea of being in the silo in pitch black would be utterly petrifying, especially while not having any food to live off. There's no daylight in there, so it genuinely would be the darkest level of darkness. So, along with the safeguard protocol being something that could be a threat to the silo, there's now an internal threat of somebody stealing the light bulbs, which could quite literally jeopardize the lives of all of the people in there because they wouldn't be able to farm anymore. The death of Olla Kent is something that McLean thinks is also connected to the people that have been thieving from Critical Supply. When McLean made a shadow of supply, she did it because she came from a long line of family members that had worked in supply. But as well as that, she tasked her with finding out who was committing the crime. I'm presuming that on the night where Olla said goodbye to Mike Davidson, she caught the thieves in the act, and that was where she was ultimately murdered and taken down to the mines. Honestly, I think it's most definitely pointing towards Ed Harwood being the murderer. There was a feud between them. He's the head of the mines, and it wouldn't surprise me if he had put some people up to the thievery so he could be in a slightly better off position. I just find it odd that her body was found deep in the mines. I feel it has to be Ed Harwood, unless somebody's trying to frame him. Paul Billings is essentially at breaking point now. And while I think his story is serving as a vessel that's going to allow us to see that he's going to turn against the silo, because I don't think he's going to be able to enforce rules that he just doesn't believe in, I also think his story is going to serve as a way of showing us that there's a threat to the silo. Not only from the outside with the algorithm, but there's a threat from the silo within, with the people that are jeopardizing the lives of everybody else with the stealing that's taking place. He's a sheriff in what feels like a lawless land at the moment, and he can't get a grasp on it. While this episode was primarily about Robert Sims and his hand in making sure that Jules survived, even though Camille needed her to be killed, the primary goal of this episode for most of the characters was to make sure that Jules ended up regaining her memory, and remembered how to prevent the safeguard protocol from being initiated with the poison gas flooding into the silo. When Jules returned over the hill during the Season 2 finale, through the flashbacks, we saw that she instantaneously became viewed as this Messiah-type figure, and this person of worship because she'd been outside and managed to survive. It's something that nobody else had done before. The ritualistic singing that the people of the silo were doing almost felt like them rejoicing at the fact that she'd returned. And it was then when the Juliet cult was born. If you think about it, she was condemned to clean, and then she rose from the dead and returned, almost like what Jesus Christ did when he was crucified, died, and then rose from the dead. So, it made sense as to why there was some form of worship there and religious views. The way that she was almost being presented over the entirety of the silo once she returned in front of all of the residents there, gradually being lowered, felt like she was being proclaimed as their savior. Even though it wasn't deliberate, and it was just a faster way of getting her down to get the attention she needed, she was ultimately on display for everybody to see. At first, Jules was with Bernard in the Digger Void, and he was telling her about what happened when they were swallowed by the flames. But all she could recall was what happened before they were both engulfed. Sims was relying on Jules for the answers on how to stop the safeguard protocol from being initiated and how it was that it could be prevented, but she just couldn't remember. We also got a glimpse back to her original purpose and wanting the answers to why they were there, how they got there, and what their purpose was in the silo with the watch that she was given by George. However, none of the relics and artifacts proved to jolt her memory to the point of remembering her time in Silo 17 and her own history. It was only once Sims gave her the Pez relic when she remembered her time with Solo, her time in Silo 17, and the fact that the safeguard protocol operated by funneling in the poison from the outside through a pipe that is somewhere deep within the silo. So, she ultimately went off to investigate it. I do now also wonder if Shirley, Martha, and Knox are going to try and communicate with some other silos following Bernard saying that they weren't tuning into the right channel. I feel like we're now at the point in the show where each episode is just going to get better and better. In my opinion, this was easily the best episode of the season. It wasn't only tension-filled and full of revelations, but it was actually quite a beautiful one. Seeing the heartbreak in Shirley's eyes as the flames were engulfing her best friend cut deep. The black and white slow-mo shots really allowed me to feel drawn into it. And I almost had to put the color into the scene in my mind because of the pain that was being felt whenever it was black and white. Plus, the division that was forming between Sims and Camille, the pain and deterioration between them was something that I also thought was quite clear to see, and also feel. There was a fantastic stylistic moment that I thought worked really well, and that was when Jules was speaking with Bernard in the Digger Void, and she remembered the moment where they were in the suits during the Season 2 finale. Do you think this episode was the best of the season so far? Personally, I do. I think Common carried this episode, and for somebody that's normally quite emotionless with his performance, I thought on this one he actually brought quite a lot to it. But what do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.